In this demonstration, we're going to show you how to take a 3D model and slice it so that we can cut the slices out of a thin piece of material with the intention of gluing the slices together to create one thick model. Okay, to start off, we're going to need to create a new file. Now, our job setup for this particular demonstration is going to be a single-sided job. The job width is going to be 28 inches, the height is going to be 28 inches, and our thickness is going to be 1 inch. The 1 inch is important because that's the thickness we would like to have our slices to be, or the maximum thickness we'd like them to be. This is obviously in inches. We're going to zero off our material surface. This is going to change later, but for now that's fine. We're going to use our bottom left-hand corner as our XY datum position. We're going to use a very high modeling resolution because it is a 3D model, so we're going to want all the pixels we can get in our appearance, and that would be perfect. So let's just go ahead and click OK. Now we're going to need a model to slice. So let's go to our modeling tab, and then we're going to import a component or 3D model. So let's click there. Now in your slicing a 3D model folder, you should find an Apple edit.v3m. So if I click that and open that up, there'll be a little apple show up in the bottom left-hand corner of your job space. This is the one we're going to actually slice, but we need to size it up to the size that we want it to be when we assemble this together, once we have the physical pieces made. So in this case, we want it to be 27 inches tall. So the first thing we can do is center this in our material. So let's just press F9 to center that. Now if you forget the F9, you can go to your drawing tab and go ahead and use the align selected objects. And then we're going to size that apple up to be 27 inches. So we're going to align it to our job alignment box. We're going to anchor it in the center. So we're going to scale it from the center. And we want our height to be 27 inches. And we have our link X and Y, so everything should be scaled up appropriately, including our Z, or our shape height. And click Apply, and click Close. And there we have it. Our apple is now scaled up. Our X and our Y is the perfect size. But now we need to take a look at our actual thickness of our model. So to do that, we're going to select it, go to our Modeling tab, and have a look at our component properties. And in this case, our apple has now been scaled up to be 3.63. Well, we'd like that to be 3.75 in the end. And that will allow us to have 3 slices at 1 inch and then a little extra slice at 0.75 of an inch, which is great. So let's just click Close. May as well tile our views and have a look at our 3D view and make sure that looks like what we expect it to be. And I think that looks perfect. Let's look straight back down on that again. Now to slice it, we're going to use the Slice Visible Model option here. And at the top of the form, we have some information about the actual model. So we know that it's 3.75 inches thick and our material is only 1 inch thick. So it's a good little reminder, check this over to make sure that everything looks okay. Now we have 2 different ways that we can slice our model. We can choose to define a thickness for the slices, or we can tell the software a number of slices that we want. In our case, we want to tell the software that each slice needs to be 1 inch, and then if there's any left over, just to create it whatever thickness it happens to be. So in this case, we're going to get 4 slices. 3 of those are going to be 1 inch thick, and the last one is going to be 0.75 inches thick. And that should work okay for our job. And the last option here, which is pretty handy to have, is Create Boundary Vectors. We're going to need these later on to create our tooling, so we could create them afterwards if we would like to, but we may as well create them now or have the software do it for us. It'll save us a little bit of time. So let's slice our model. You'll see that in the 2D view, we're going to start to see our slices appear, and our 3D view won't change at all because these slices are perfect, although you did see it just puff up. And that's because all of our slices are being added to our original apple. We don't need our original apple anymore, so we can go ahead and either hide that, or we can select it, right click, and just press delete and get rid of it. And now the stack of slices is the proper thickness and looks like it did when it was just one solid apple. Now also, it'd be good to point out that we have up here in our layers manager a bunch of vector layers. So each slice, each component slice is on its own layer with an appropriate border vector. And then we have the layer 1, and this was created when we first set up our job. And we don't need that anymore, so we may as well just go ahead and right click on that and delete it. So now we just have 4 vector layers and 4 components. Let's take a second and look at all of our different slices. So if we go ahead and turn off all the slices but the first one, so we can select it, right click and say show only this. Then in our 2D view, you'll see that we have 1 component, and we should actually hide all of our other vector layers as well. So we have 1 component, and then we have 2 vectors, and these vectors have been drawn around the area that's actually a 3D model. The top of this is flat, and it'll be at the surface of your material, so we don't need to waste any time cutting that. All we need to do is just cut the area between these 2 vectors, and that's pretty handy. So if we go ahead and look at slice 2, you'll see the same thing. If we look at slice 3, it's the same thing. And then our last slice, well, it's the different one. It should only be 1 vector around this top little bit. Okay, so let's turn all those back on again, just so we can see them all. Now we're going to have to actually increase the size of our material or our job setup so that we can accommodate all the slices on one sheet. So let's go to our drawing tab and up here to set job dimensions and origin. We'll click that, and we're going to change the size of our job to be 48 by 48. And that's all we're going to change because the thickness will be the same and everything else looks great. So we're going to click OK. Now the next step is going to be to arrange all of our slices onto our job. And to do that, we're just going to select the component and the appropriate vectors and move them to a space on our job so that we can have them all separated. We're just going to eyeball this, and then we're going to go in and specifically set a few things up. So let's go to our modeling tab, and we're going to choose our top slice. Hold down the shift key, and we're going to select the vector as well. We're going to click that, and we're going to slide that up there. The next slice, we're going to grab it, hold down the shift key, grab the appropriate vectors for that, and let's put you over here. The next one, we're going to grab this and this, and we're going to move it up here. Now, obviously that's not going to work because things aren't arranged quite right. So let's hold down our Alt key, and we're going to rotate this guy around sideways like that. That'll give us a little bit more space. Let's move this and his outline over here. And then we'll take these, and we're just going to rotate it just slightly to fit in there. And that looks pretty good. Now we'd like to have around the edge of our material a 1-inch gap all the way around. So let's just go ahead and take care of that. So we're going to select our outline for slice number 4 and the actual component. Oh, I'm sorry, slice number 1. And we're going to go to our drawing tab, and we're going to actually move this. So we're going to move it to the corner, and I want to leave a 1-inch gap here and 1-inch gap on the bottom. So we're going to use an anchor point of the bottom left. This will be an absolute coordinate, and we're going to put in 1 inch and 1 inch and click apply. And now it's 1 inch from the side and 1 inch from the bottom. Let's just go ahead and do it for this apple slice 2. Holding down our shift key, we're going to grab both of those, except for we're going to use a different anchor point, the bottom right. And we're going to make this 47, and we'll make this 1, and we'll click apply. That'll put it in the corner properly. And we'll do this one as well. And we'll make this 47. Oh, we need to change the anchor point. We'll make this 47 and 47, and then we'll click apply. And that should be great. We're not going to bother to move the last slice because there's lots of room around it. Okay, There's a few things that we're going to need to think about before we cut this out. Firstly, we're going to have to make some changes to the vector boundaries so that we've got the right ones to use to create our toolpaths with. We also need to think about how we're going to hold down these parts. Of course, there's a bunch of different ways that we can do it. And you're just going to need to choose the one that best fits your setup. But we can give you a couple suggestions here. We could actually mark the tops of these with a toolpath and then actually drill down through them and screw it right to your wasteboard on your machine, and that way they wouldn't move when they were done cutting. That would work fine for these guys, but for this last slice, that's not going to work very well, so that might not be the best solution. We could use tabs, but again, it might be kind of difficult just because of the way that the shapes are ending up here. It might require a whole lot of cleanup, which might not be the best idea. Or what we could do is actually add in a very thin piece of material to the back, and that way it'll hold everything together. And when we do our profile cut, we won't actually cut all the way through, and that way afterwards you can go ahead and remove them from the board and do a little bit of hand finishing and then stack up your slices and you should be okay. But like I said, it will require a little bit of hand finishing, but I think in this particular situation that's probably the best bet. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to go to our modeling tab and we're going to add in a zero plane. So we're going to click that. And in our component tree, you'll see we've added in a zero plane. In our 3D view, you can see a zero plane. But in our 2D view, you can't see a zero plane. That's because when the software creates a zero plane, it puts it on its own layer and it also turns it off. So we can't see it. But if we click this, it'll come back on again. If we click the light bulb, it'll go back off again. We're going to leave it hidden because we really don't need to see it in our 2D view because we know it's there in our 3D view. So the next thing we need to do is to take the zero plane and we need to turn it into a merged component. So we're going to select it, right click, combine mode, and we're going to change that to merge. Now if we give our zero plane a little bit of thickness, then what will happen when we go to cut out these thin parts, we won't have a really thin edge, and we can always re-establish that later with some sanding or a little bit of finishing. But it will give us some material so it'll hold onto the board, it won't break out, and also we won't chip those really thin edges. So if we go to our component properties, we'll give our zero plane a very, very small base height there of 0.03, and that should be enough to hold your parts in place and give us a minimal amount of edge refinishing that we're going to need to do. So just go ahead and close that down. Perfect. So now let's just go ahead and think about how to develop our tooling or what vectors we're going to need to do this with. When the software created our vectors for us, it grouped them together, which is really handy for when we were moving things around, so we didn't worry about losing any. But we need to now ungroup them so we can regroup them into the convenient packages that we need in order to create our tooling. So let's just hold down our shift key and select all of the vectors that are grouped. We're going to right click on those and we're going to go to ungroup. And then we're going to select all of these top vectors, holding down our shift key, and we're going to group those together. And then we're going to take all of these outside vectors and we're going to group those together. And then we're going to create an offset of these outside vectors. And why we're going to do that is because we're going to use that offset for our finishing pass and roughing pass so that our tool will actually go right to the edge of our 3D model and over the edge slightly to give us a nice finished edge. If we didn't do that, then we'd end up chancing our tool not actually finishing right up to the edge. It would just actually ride on that line, and we don't want that to happen. So let's just go to our drawing tab, offset outwards. Usually we'd offset out the radius of our tool plus a little bit. In this case, we're going to use a 1/2 inch ball nose end mill. So a 1/4 inch would be half of that plus a little bit will give us a little bit of play area. We don't want to create sharp corners. We don't want to delete the originals, but we do want to select the new ones. It'll just make it easier for us to group them together. Let's offset that, close that down, right click on top of one of those vectors, and we'll group those together. So what we have for vectors now is we have these outside ones for our roughing and our finishing pass. We have the next one in. This is going to be used for our profile cut at the end, and then choosing both the outside and the inside. This is what we're going to use to actually do our roughing and our 3D finishing toolpath so that we can get the 3D detail that we need along these edges. So now that we have all that, we're going to jump over to our toolpaths tab and start to develop some tooling. As always, the first thing we need to make sure of is our material setup. So let's check that out. So our material thickness is proper. It's 1 inch. We're going to start at our bottom left-hand corner. That's perfect. So now we get to choose where we want to actually zero off our machine. We could zero off our material surface, but in this case, it would probably be best if we actually zeroed off our machine bed. That way, in the end, this thin layer of material actually will be there, and we won't risk having it be thinner on some spots and thinner and thicker in others. So choosing this will mean that this will actually stay where it is, and we're sure that we're going to have that 0.03 worth of material there for us. We don't need to worry about our model position because we filled up the model with our slices, and the rapid Z gaps and the home start position are all going to be based on your own machine and your whatever setup you have. For us, we'll just go ahead and make the gap above a 1/2 inch, and our clearance and plunge moves are 1/2 inch, and that's fine. So let's click OK. Now the first toolpath we're going to develop is going to be our roughing pass, and we're going to rough between these top vectors and holding down our shift key, these outside vectors. And we need to select the tool, and the tool is going to be the 1/2 inch ball nose. And we are going to select that, but we're going to change some of the actual settings for that. So we're going to edit those here. And these setting changes will be temporary just for this toolpath. And so that's not going to mess around with our actual templated tools that we have in our tool database. So we're going to change our pass step to be a little bit more aggressive at 0.3. Our step over, it's a roughing pass, so we can put that to 40%. And everything else here looks great. So let's just click OK. We're going to be using a selection of vectors as our boundary, like we've selected over here. No boundary offset. We're going to leave a thin film of material behind for a couple reasons. One is that way when we do our roughing pass, we won't chip the material that we need for our surface finish, and then we need to leave enough material behind so that when we do our finishing pass, we can remove some, and so 0.3 of an inch is perfect. We're going to use our roughing strategy, Z-level roughing. And this last pass is fine. The order is level by level. A long X is perfect. No ramp or plunge moves. And we're just going to rename this 3D roughing, and we'll calculate that. It's always important to preview your visible toolpaths, but just to help with the visualization thing, we're actually going to cut this in green foam. So let's change our material to be a solid color, and we're going to choose green. That looks great. And then we'll preview our visible toolpath. And that's what I expected to see. If that wasn't what I expected to see, then I should go back in and adjust my tooling, because if it's not right on screen, it's definitely not going to be right when I go to cut it on my CNC. So let's look straight back down on that again. Let's close this and let's move on to our finishing. We're going to use that same set of vectors for our 3D finishing. And to make life easy, we're going to use the same 1/2 inch ball nose. We'll select that. We'll take a look at our settings. We're just going to change our step over to be a little bit more than that. It'll save us a bit of time. And that all looks good. Okay, and use those selected vectors. No boundary offset. We're going to use raster as our machining strategy. We'll just call this a 3D finish, and we'll calculate that. And then we'll preview that visible toolpath. And again, if that wasn't what we expected to see, then we should go back and actually take a look and see if we can correct it. Everything looks great. And that's perfect. You'll see a few little artifacts here, but we're not going to worry about those because we will be doing some hand finishing, so we can get rid of those in the end. And that looks really good. So for our last pass, we need to do our profile cut. So let's go and choose profile toolpath strategy. We're going to start depth of 1 or 0, excuse me. We're going to go all the way down through our material. Now, because we're using a tool that has a radius on it, then we're going to be protected from breaking through everywhere, and there'll be enough material there to hold this in place, hopefully. We're going to select our tool. We're going to use that 1/2 inch bullnose again. Let's select that. We're going to use all of the settings that were there are good for a profile cut. Actually, we're going to go in and we're going to change some of those settings. We're going to edit that. We can actually go much deeper than that. 5.3. We're going to change this again to be 40%, and we'll go OK. We're going to go outside the line, which is great. And we're going to need to select these vectors inside our actual profile vectors that we want. We're going to go outside the line. No separate last pass. If we did want to add in some tabs, we could do that now. If there's some areas we felt could use them, we could do that. We're not going to do that. We don't need to worry about any of our ramps. And we're just going to rename that, and we'll calculate that. Then we'll preview that visible toolpath. And that's great. Now, every so often you'll see it actually break through, but more often than not, it doesn't. So they should stay in place for us so that we can go ahead and cut those out. And we stack them up. We'll just have to round over this edge a little bit, but we know that we have at least 0.03 of material there, so we shouldn't break any of our really thin areas of our apple. That looks really great, so let's close that down. Now we can go ahead and save off our toolpaths if we wanted to. And these are all the same toolpaths, so you could go ahead and bundle those all up in one group if you wanted to, and save those out using the appropriate post processor for you to run on your CNC. Let's close that. Let's just go ahead and file, and we're going to save this off as slicing a 3D model _ toolpaths, and click save. And now that we've done that, that concludes this demonstration. I hope you found that interesting, and I can't wait to see what you make with this great slicing tool.